Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. Never mistake silence for safety. Sometimes it's the calm of an assassin sharpening their blade. Chosen one, tonight we're not talking about ordinary warfare. We're talking about the kind of battle where your enemies thought they were sending hunters after you. But in truth, they were sending sheep into the lion's den. Do you know that in covert military history, more missions have failed not because of the target's strength, but because the target was already trained to anticipate the ambush? That's exactly what happened with you. They paid people to attack you, not realizing they were signing them up for a suicide mission. They thought you were soft, distracted, and unprepared, yet every move they made only pushed them deeper into the snare you silently crafted through years of pain, isolation, and rebirth. The irony? They believed you were the prey, but you were actually the test. They just didn't know the exam came with lethal consequences. And let's sprinkle some humor on this, because honestly, watching your enemies prep to take you down is like watching someone bring a water pistol to face a flamethrower. Cute effort, wrong weapon. So buckle up, because what you're about to hear will prove one thing. When you're chosen, attacks don't just fail. They backfire so hard the attacker wonders if they accidentally signed up to fight a ghost assassin sent straight from God. Number one, they mistook your stillness for weakness, not realizing it was precision. They mistook your stillness for weakness, not realizing it was precision. The greatest mistake your enemies ever made was thinking your quiet was the same as being powerless. They saw you pause, they saw you observing, they saw you not reacting right away, and in their shallow understanding they assumed you were scared, cornered, or clueless. But that stillness was your strategy. Every second you stayed quiet, you were calculating. Every moment you didn't respond, you were sharpening your timing. Assassins don't waste energy swinging wildly. They wait for the one move that ends everything. That's what they never understood about you. Stillness doesn't mean you're asleep, it means you're awake on a level they can't comprehend. While they were busy throwing gossip, lies, and attacks your way, you were standing so steady that you picked apart their patterns. You learned who was pulling the strings, who was weak in the group, who panicked under pressure, and who thought they were untouchable. By the time they thought they had you boxed in, you had already mapped their downfall. Your stillness is precision because it denies them control. Attackers thrive on reactions. They want you to flinch, to panic, to break formation so they can declare victory. But when you don't react, when you refuse to be shaken, you starve their schemes. They swing into the air, burning all their energy, while you stand there conserving yours for the one decisive strike. That's assassin training. Never waste motion, never reveal your weapon until it's time to end the fight. And here's the part that stings them the most. They thought they were intimidating you, but really you were studying them like open books. Your silence wasn't fear, it was X-ray vision. You were pulling information from their every move while giving them nothing in return. That's why they look confused now. They can't figure out how someone they underestimated has dismantled every trap they set. They can't process how you survived attacks they were sure would finish you. The truth is simple. Weakness panics. Strength prepares, you prepared. And when you finally move, it's not noisy, it's not desperate, it's surgical. That's why your enemies are left wondering what just happened, realizing too late that they weren't fighting prey. They were exposing themselves to precision they never saw coming. Number two, they hired beginners to challenge someone who trains in darkness. They hired beginners to challenge someone who trains in darkness. That was the root of their downfall. The people sent to attack you weren't seasoned in real warfare, they were amateurs, operating on jealousy, pride, and cheap payoffs. They thought gossip could shake you, that lies could bury you, that intimidation could paralyze you. What they didn't know is that you've been through the kind of training money can't buy. Your battles weren't theoretical, they were lived. Every betrayal you endured, every loss you carried in silence, every night you had to rebuild yourself with no one to call. That was your boot camp. You were trained by the pain they have only pretended to survive. The darkness was your classroom. While others escaped their storms, You stayed in yours until you mastered it. You learned patience, resilience, and focus when nobody was clapping, when no one believed in you, when you had to sharpen yourself without external validation. That's why their attacks fell flat. They were acting out of sudden emotion. But you've been forged through years of endurance. They were swinging wildly. You were hitting targets without missing. It's the difference between someone who's shadowboxing for show and someone who's been in real fights. You've survived betrayals from people you loved, abandonment from people you trusted, and setups designed to ruin you completely. Those experiences turned you into something no enemy for hire could match. That's why when they tried to take you down, they were already out of their depth. They were trained by greed, but you were trained by fire. And here's the brutal truth. They thought they were walking into an easy job, but they were signing up for humiliation. Attacking you was never going to be a win. It was a lesson. They were too inexperienced to see that when they came against you, they weren't just dealing with a person. They were dealing with everything you've survived. That survival is what makes you dangerous. That survival is what makes you untouchable. So while they operated like reckless beginners, you stood like someone who has already graduated from a school they couldn't even survive one day in. That's why they failed. That's why they're shaken. They underestimated the years of training that came from your darkness, and they found out the hard way that no rookie can outfight someone who was born in the shadows and mastered them. Number 3, they didn't understand that you learn survival by dying daily. They didn't understand that you learn survival by dying daily. The enemies who came against you thought pain was new to you, that betrayal would shock you, or that isolation would weaken you. What they failed to realize is that your entire life has been a series of deaths and resurrections. You've died to friendships you thought were forever, died to family connections that turned poisonous, died to opportunities that were stolen, and died to versions of yourself that could not carry the weight of your calling. Every single time you rose again, sharper, stronger, and more refined than before. This is why their attacks had no real effect. They were swinging at a person who had already buried countless versions of themselves and learned how to breathe again after every loss. The people they paid to hurt you thought they could break you with a wound, but they didn't know you've been walking with scars for years. Pain doesn't surprise you anymore, it educates you. Every time you were cut, you learned how to heal faster. Every time something inside you collapsed, you discovered a new strength you didn't know existed. When someone has learned to die daily, survival stops being about clinging to life. It becomes about mastering transformation. You don't resist change anymore. You absorb it, you bend with it, you grow through it. That's what makes you untouchable. You've lost too much to be shaken by another loss. You've been rejected too many times to crumble at rejection. You've been forced to rebuild from nothing so many times that starting over doesn't terrify you. It empowers you. This is the edge your enemies didn't see coming. They thought an attack would be your end, but for you, endings are beginnings. They thought betrayal would leave you broken, but betrayal has always been your trainer. They thought loss would silence you, but loss taught you how to speak with more power. By the time they launched their mission against you, you were no longer the fragile target they imagined. You were someone who had already walked through fire and come out with the flames as armor. The truth is, they didn't face someone who feared death. They faced someone who has turned dying daily into a survival skill. And that kind of person doesn't just endure attacks, they turn every strike into resurrection fuel. Number 4, they mistook numbers for power, not knowing you fought alone against armies. They mistook numbers for power, not knowing you fought alone against armies. The truth is, there is no safety in numbers when the group itself is weak, fragmented, and fueled by nothing but a shared hatred. They believed that gathering together in packs would intimidate you, that the sound of many voices and the pressure of collective force would bury you. But what they didn't know is that you've spent years in solitude, fighting battles that came at you from every direction without a single hand to help you. You were forced to become your own army. While they depended on each other to feel strong, you learned how to generate strength from within. That kind of training changes everything. Solitude made you surgical. It taught you how to spot weaknesses in groups, how to see the cracks in their so-called unity, how to watch one person's hesitation infect the whole. Where they needed numbers to feel powerful, you discovered that true power comes from precision. When you fought alone against entire storms of betrayal, abuse, and spiritual warfare, a group of enemies looks less like an army and more like easy prey. What they don't realize is that numbers create noise, and noise creates mistakes. The bigger their circle, the more room for errors, egos, and conflicts. You never needed 20 hands, you needed one move. That one move is focus. That one move is resilience. That one move is knowing who you are when no one stands with you. Numbers don't scare someone who has faced battles with zero support and still survived. In fact, their numbers expose them because you can see how desperately they cling to each other for courage while you stand firm on your own. They thought you would panic under the weight of so many voices rising against you, but you've already endured seasons where the whole world felt like it was against you. Those were your training grounds. That's where you learned how to dismantle enemies who think their strength comes from togetherness, when in reality it comes from discipline and spiritual depth. So when they came at you in numbers, they unknowingly repeated the same mistake history shows again and again. Armies fall not because of how many they have, but because of who they face. And when the one they face has survived armies in silence, the crowd doesn't intimidate them, it collapses before them. Number 5, they thought you were their target, but you were actually the test. They thought you were their target, but you were actually the test. That's the twist they never saw coming. In their minds, you were just another victim, someone they could use, betray, and discard without consequence. They believed the contract was simple: destroy you, silence you, take what they could from you. But what they didn't realize is that the whole setup was never really about you. It was about them. God positioned you as the measure, the mirror, the dividing line that revealed who they truly were beneath the surface. When they plotted against you, they weren't just exposing hatred, they were exposing their own blindness. They couldn't see the bigger picture. They couldn't see that their hands were being watched, that their motives were being recorded, that their choices were being weighed against eternity. They thought they were hunting, but their hunt became evidence against them. Your presence brought their real character into the light. It was never about your destruction. It was about the exposure of their greed, their dishonor, and their cowardice. Every attack they launched became a confession. Every scheme they joined revealed where their loyalty truly lay. By coming after you, they showed that they had no spiritual vision, no discernment, no understanding of who they were touching. They were blind to the fact that chosen ones carry an assignment far beyond what human eyes can measure. They couldn't see the weight of what was on your life, so when they reached for you, they were actually reaching into a trap that would strip them bare. And that's the part that unsettles them now. They thought you were bait for destruction, but in reality, you were bait for revelation. They didn't fail because you fought back harder. They failed because they exposed themselves. Their hands betrayed them, their words betrayed them, and their choices screamed louder than anything you could have ever said. God never needed you to retaliate. He just needed you to stand still long enough for their true selves to come out. And when it did, the test was marked. They failed. You weren't the hunted. You were the assignment designed to reveal who was blind, who was greedy, and who was too cowardly to stand for truth. They weren't exposing you. You were exposing them. Number 6. They didn't know you don't fight fair. You fight final. They didn't know you don't fight fair. You fight final. Your enemies assumed you would react the way most people do, trading insult for insult, strike for strike, wound for wound. They expected childish games where nobody really wins and the war drags on. But you don't fight to entertain. You don't fight to prove a point. You fight to end things so thoroughly that the same battle never dares to rise again. That's why they never stood a chance. Your defense isn't about scratching back or teaching temporary lessons. It's about creating such a decisive response that the threat itself collapses. You don't just silence attacks. You dismantle the ability to attack you again. That's the mindset of someone who has had to fight too many battles to waste energy on round two. You've learned that survival requires efficiency. If you strike, it's surgical. If you defend, it's absolute. And once it's done, it's done. The people who came against you didn't realize this. They thought they were playing chess with someone who was distracted, emotional, and easily manipulated. But you weren't playing their game. You were rewriting the rules. You don't retaliate with petty moves. You retaliate with finality. When you close a door, it stays closed. When you expose an enemy, their mask never fits again. When you declare war over, it's because there's nothing left for war to hold on to. This is why you terrify them. They're used to people who leave cracks, who leave room for reconciliation, who can be provoked into endless cycles of retaliation. But you aren't built like that. You cut cycles, you close chapters, you seal coffins. That's why anyone who comes against you ends up regretting it, not because you shout louder, but because you leave no chance for round two. It's the assassin in you. Assassins don't fight fair because fairness drags battles into the future. They fight final because their mission is closure. And that's what you embody. When someone tries to destroy you, they don't get an extended war, they get their last war. You don't waste time scratching back because scratches heal. You strike where it ensures there's no comeback. And that's why every attack against you turns into silence. Because once you end it, it never rises again. Number 7. They thought you operated in the physical, not knowing your arena is the invisible. They thought you operated in the physical, not knowing your arena is the invisible. That's why they failed before they even began. They plotted with human strategies. They schemed with earthly weapons. They organized attacks through gossip, lies, intimidation, and manipulation. Tools that work well on ordinary people. But you aren't ordinary. You've never been. Your strength doesn't come from the surface. It doesn't come from fists or threats or numbers. It comes from a realm they cannot touch. And that's what makes you untouchable. The truth is, while they were building their traps in the physical, you were dismantling them in the spirit. They prepared flesh and blood weapons, but you don't war in flesh and blood. You war in prayer. You war in discipline. You war in the unseen spaces where their plots have no oxygen. Every move they made in the natural already collapsed in the invisible before it could touch you. They couldn't understand why their attacks never landed the way they planned. It's because they were swinging at smoke while you struck at their spirit. That's what unsettles them the most. You don't look like a fighter, but you fight on a level they can't comprehend. They were prepared for an argument, for a breakdown, for a visible reaction. Instead, they got silence, strategy, and a counterattack that didn't come from your hands, but from the God who backs you. You didn't need to chase them down. You let the unseen world handle what their eyes couldn't even recognize. And here's where their blindness betrayed them. They assumed because you didn't fight back physically that you weren't fighting at all. They mistook your refusal to get dirty with their tactics as weakness, when in reality it was evidence that you were operating in another dimension. Their weapons can only wound flesh. Yours strike spirit, mind, and destiny. That's why you didn't just survive their attacks, you reversed them. Every chosen one knows the real battlefield isn't in what people can see, it's in what they can't. That's why you're still standing. That's why they're exhausted and confused. They were busy trying to bruise your body and your name, but you were dismantling the very spirit behind their attacks. In the end, they were left swinging into nothing, while you walked away victorious from a war they never even understood. Number 8. They saw scars as proof of weakness, not as badges of immunity. They saw scars as proof of weakness, not as badges of immunity. That's where they miscalculated. To them, your scars looked like evidence that you'd been damaged, that you'd been broken down too many times to rise again. They mistook the marks left behind by your battles as signs you could be taken out easily. But what they didn't know is that every scar was actually a certificate of survival, proof that you've already faced weapons sharper than theirs and still walked away breathing. Scars don't make you fragile, they make you resistant. Your enemies don't understand that the very things they think disqualify you are the same things that make you impossible to destroy. Every betrayal hardened your discernment. Every heartbreak toughened your spirit. Every setup rewired your instincts. The poisons they thought would paralyze you became the medicine that trained your system to handle worse. When you've already survived venom, a little sting doesn't scare you. That's the power of someone who's been through fire. They don't flinch at smoke. They don't panic at sparks. You've already been engulfed, already burned, already tested by flames meant to incinerate you, and yet you came out walking. So when they launch their recycled tactics, when they try old tricks with new faces, they don't realize you've been inoculated. They're giving you a dose of poison you've already built immunity against. It's like watching an enemy pull out a weapon you've already been cut with before. The first time it drew blood, it almost ended you. But you survived, and the wound became wisdom. Now when they swing with that same blade, it doesn't pierce you. It just bounces off the armor your scars created. That's why they're frustrated. They can't understand why the traps they used on others collapse when it comes to you. They can't process why the poison they're used to deploying so easily suddenly has no effect. The truth is simple. Scars are not signs of defeat, they are signs of resilience. They tell the story of someone who didn't just survive but evolved. And when evolution has already hardened your spirit, no recycled plot, no familiar betrayal, no repeated weapon can succeed. They thought scars meant you were weak. In reality, scars meant you were immune. Number 9. They thought they could corner you, not knowing you are the trap. They thought they could corner you, not knowing you are the trap. That's the irony of their entire mission. They believed they were clever, that their schemes would pin you down and strip you of options. To them, every rumor, every lie, every calculated betrayal was tightening the walls around you. They expected to see you panic, to watch you scramble, to finally prove that you weren't as strong as you appeared. What they never realized was that your so-called corner was actually bait. You were never the one being trapped. You were the one doing the trapping. This is what separates you from them. While they were playing checkers, you were setting up chess. You let them believe you were outnumbered. You let them think their plans were hidden. You let them underestimate your silence. All the while, you were studying them, allowing them to gather, to expose themselves, to overcommit. They couldn't see that their own ambition was tightening the noose, not around your neck, but around theirs. That's the assassin's strategy. Real power doesn't run from ambushes, it manufactures them. You don't waste time chasing enemies down when you can make them come to you. That's exactly what happened. They took the bait of their own arrogance. They followed the trail of their greed. And before long, they were so deep in their attacks that they had no idea the walls were closing in on them. What they thought was victory was actually self-exposure. They thought you were cornered, but corners are where hunters wait. You turned what looked like weakness into the perfect setup. The more they pressed, the more evidence they created against themselves. The more they tried to box you in, the clearer their intentions became to everyone watching. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. They had walked right into the net you pretended not to weave, and this is why they can't win against you. Their strength lies in deception, but your strength lies in patience and strategy. They only know how to chase. You know how to lure. They assumed you were the hunted, but in reality you were waiting, calm, precise, and unbothered, until they trapped themselves. What they thought was your downfall was actually their exposure. They didn't corner you, they crowned you. Number 10. They thought they could break you with fear, not knowing you're intimate with it. They thought they could break you with fear, not knowing you're intimate with it. Fear isn't new to you. It's not a stranger. It's not an intruder. And it's certainly not a master over your life anymore. You've lived with fear in ways that most people wouldn't survive. You've walked through nights so heavy that breathing felt like a battle. You've faced betrayals that left you unsure if you'd ever trust again. You've endured losses that made the future look like a dark hallway with no exit. Fear has sat at your table, slept in your room, and shadowed you for years. But here's the difference. You never let it own you. You studied it, confronted it, and stripped it of its power. That's why when they tried to use fear as a weapon against you, it failed before it even touched you. They thought fear was going to paralyze you, but it's already been your trainer. They thought it would shut you down, but fear taught you discipline. It taught you how to keep moving even with your knees shaking. It taught you how to speak truth when your voice trembled. It taught you that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's mastering it. So when they pulled out intimidation, you didn't crumble. You smiled because they were using a weapon you already owned. The truth is, fear lost its grip on you years ago. At some point you realized that fear was nothing more than an emotion waiting for direction. You stopped letting it control you and started making it work for you. Where others freeze, you focus. Where others retreat, you advance. Where others second guess, you strike. That's why you've been able to step into situations that would break the average person. Fear sharpened you. It turned into a blade in your hands, one sharper than any threat your enemies could throw. And that's what unsettles them most. They're used to people folding at the first sign of intimidation. They're used to fear turning men into cowards and women into silence. But you aren't wired that way. You've danced with fear long enough to know its rhythm, and now you lead the steps. They didn't break you with it, they built you with it. And that's why they can't win, because every time they swing fear at you, you cut deeper with the very blade they thought would destroy you. Number 11. They didn't realize every attack makes you smarter, while every attack makes them sloppier. They didn't realize every attack makes you smarter, while every attack makes them sloppier. This is the part of the story they'll never admit. You were never losing when they came against you, you were learning. Every scheme they threw at you was meant to crush you, but all it really did was educate you. You took note of who betrayed you, how they moved, what methods they used, and how quickly they revealed themselves when pressure hit. You became a student of your own battles, absorbing the lessons while refusing to let the pain make you bitter. That's why every attack only made you sharper. Your enemies, on the other hand, are reactionary. They can't help but show their hand too early. They get excited, greedy, or desperate, and in the heat of it all, they expose their own weaknesses. They don't know patience. They don't know discipline. They don't know how to play a long game. Every time they attack, they burn energy they can't get back, while you conserve yours. Every time they strike, they confirm their intentions to everyone watching, while you stay steady and let them unravel themselves. This is why the scales shifted in your favor without you even lifting a finger. You learned how to adapt mid-battle. When one attack didn't work, you adjusted your defense. When betrayal blindsided you, you restructured your circle. When lies tried to bury you, you built strength in your truth. Slowly, every attempt at your downfall became another layer of wisdom. You became immune to their games, not because they stopped, but because you trained yourself to use each one as a stepping stone. Meanwhile, they got sloppier. They repeated tactics. They became predictable. They got careless with their words, reckless with their alliances, and lazy with their setups. Where they once thought they were outsmarting you, they were actually exposing themselves as amateurs while you graduated to mastery. The irony is clear. They thought constant attacks would wear you down, but constant attacks only made you evolve. Every loss turned into knowledge. Every betrayal turned into discernment. Every hit turned into strategy. You didn't just survive the battle, you became lethal in it. And now their own aggression is the very reason they can never defeat you. They armed you with everything you needed to destroy them without even trying. And number 12. They didn't know their assignment was actually suicide. They didn't know their assignment was actually suicide. That's the cruel twist of their own choices. They were so eager to take you out, so blinded by greed, envy, or the promise of a quick payout that they didn't stop to ask what they were really signing up for. They assumed the assignment was simple: target you, weaken you, remove you. But chosen ones don't fall like ordinary people. When they came against you, they weren't just launching an attack. They were writing their own ending. This is what separates you from the average target. Assassins don't fight on the surface. They flip the assignment back onto the attacker. Every scheme they thought would silence you became the very trap that silenced them. Every rumor they spread came back to stain their own name. Every lie they believed would destroy you ended up destroying their credibility. They didn't know that going after you wasn't just dangerous, it was fatal to their reputation, their alliances, and in some cases even their sanity. The reality is, trying to kill what God has appointed is the fastest way to kill yourself. They didn't understand that. They saw you as a human opponent, but you weren't standing alone. You were backed by something higher, something untouchable. Their assignment wasn't against flesh and blood, it was against divine will. That's why it collapsed so brutally. They weren't fighting you, they were fighting the one who sent you, and nobody survives that fight. What makes it even more tragic is that they could have chosen differently. They could have walked away, but instead they sold themselves into destruction. The moment they signed up to harm you, they signed a death note for their own peace, their own blessings, and their own futures. They thought they were cashing in on your downfall, not realizing they had just invested in their own ruin. So yes, they believed they were taking you out, but in reality they were digging their own grave with every step. That's the assassin's truth. You never let an attack stay on you, you turn it back on the sender. And by the time they realize what's happening, it's already too late. The contract they thought was about your end was actually about theirs. Their assignment wasn't a mission, it was suicide. Number 13, they saw you as prey, not realizing you are predator in disguise. They saw you as prey, not realizing you are predator in disguise. That's the miscalculation they made, and it cost them more than they could afford. They looked at you through shallow eyes, your quietness, your patience, your endurance, and assumed it was weakness. They thought because you didn't roar, you couldn't bite. They mistook humility for helplessness and endurance for fragility. What they didn't know was that chosen ones master the art of camouflage. You learned early that showing your full strength too soon only feeds the enemy's strategy. So you let them underestimate you, you let them walk confidently into their own undoing. That's the real skill of a spiritual predator. It isn't always about attacking first. It's about letting your enemy reveal themselves fully. While they assumed they had cornered prey, you were studying them, memorizing their weaknesses and waiting for the moment when the hunter becomes the hunted. Every move they made, thinking they had the upper hand, only placed them deeper into your line of sight. They mistook your silence for fear, not realizing it was calculation. And when the tables turned, their own hands betrayed them. That's why those same hands raised against you now tremble. It's not because you shouted, threatened, or retaliated the way they expected. It's because you unmasked them with precision. They thought they had you trapped, but you were the trap all along. The predator doesn't chase, it stalks, waits, and then strikes once in a way that leaves no room for retaliation. The truth is, being chosen equips you with an instinct ordinary people don't have. You've survived enough ambushes to know how to play weak until it's time to reveal strength. You've endured enough betrayal to recognize patterns others would miss. And you've been overlooked long enough to perfect the art of hiding power until it's too late for your enemies to escape it. That's why the trembling isn't just fear, it's recognition. They realized too late that they weren't hunting prey at all. They walked into the presence of someone who had been studying them from the shadows. Someone who knows how to finish battles without even starting them. They saw you as prey. What they didn't realize is that you were the predator in disguise, the quiet storm, the hidden blade, the one who never needed to be loud to be lethal. And by the time they discovered the truth, the hunt was already over. And number 14, they thought your wrath would look human, but it's divine. They thought your wrath would look human, but it's divine. That was their first mistake, believing you would respond to betrayal and attack the way they would. They expected tantrums, petty revenge, loud words, or desperate scrambling. They thought you would swing blindly out of anger, fighting them on their level. What they didn't understand is that chosen ones don't fight from ego, they fight from assignment. Your retaliation is never about proving a point, it's about carrying out the mandate God placed in you. That's why when you move, the atmosphere shifts. Your response is not fueled by pride, but by purpose, and that makes it untouchable. When God's hand is behind your actions, your wrath doesn't just stop an enemy, it dismantles their foundation. People underestimate this because divine retaliation doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's silent collapse, sometimes it's unseen battles that leave your enemies restless, broke, sick, or exposed. They think it's coincidence, but it's consequence. You don't need to plot their downfall. It's built into the structure of the mission you're carrying. Their attack wasn't just against you, it was against the one who sent you. That means the retaliation isn't yours alone, it belongs to heaven. And heaven doesn't miss. The reason they implode instead of just failing is because divine wrath is total. Human wrath aims to hurt feelings, reputations, or resources. Divine wrath targets the root. It shakes their masks, their alliances, their finances, their false confidence, and their spiritual covering. It strips them layer by layer until they're left exposed to the same darkness they tried to use against you. That's why many of your enemies collapse in ways that look unrelated to their attacks on you. It's not random, it's divine. This is why you never had to shout, plot, or scramble for revenge. Your enemies expected human wrath, but what met them was divine justice disguised as your calm retaliation. They thought they were playing with a person. They were actually wrestling with an assignment. That's a battle no human can win, and by the time they realized the war they picked wasn't against you, but against the force backing you, it was too late. Their failure wasn't just defeat, it was implosion, because nothing survives when it collides with divine wrath. The truth is undeniable. Every attack they launched, every scheme they conceived, every hand they raised against you only revealed their weakness and amplified your power. They mistook numbers for strength, fear for leverage, and human strategy for mastery, never realizing that you operate on a level they cannot perceive. Solitude sharpened you, scars fortified you, and divine alignment guided every move. While they acted in haste, panic, and ego, you moved with precision, patience, and purpose. They thought they were hunting prey, cornering a victim, or controlling a situation, but in reality, they were exposing themselves, walking into traps they could not see, and stepping onto a battlefield where they were unarmed. Your enemies failed because they assumed the rules of engagement were theirs to write. They didn't understand that you don't fight to scratch back. You fight to end things. You don't react, you resolve. You don't wage war in flesh and blood alone. You move in the unseen where their weapons are powerless. Every attempt to intimidate, harm, or destroy only served to educate you, to strengthen you, and to dismantle them. Their plots were nothing but lessons, their attacks nothing but ammunition for your rise. And the most extraordinary truth of all, they were never the hunters. You were never the prey. You were the test, the trap, the force that turned their ambition into self-destruction. Divine wrath, cultivated resilience, and strategic mastery mean that every strike they attempted has rebounded with consequences they cannot escape. They walked in thinking they were dealing with a human opponent, only to collide with a chosen one, someone whose power is far beyond human comprehension, someone whose victories are inevitable, someone whose legacy is unstoppable. Remember this: nothing they throw at you lands. Nothing they design succeeds. They are dismantled by their own ambition, undone by their own choices, and exposed by the very target they sought to destroy. You are untouchable, unshakable, and unstoppable. The wars they attempted to wage are already over. They lost before they even realized the battle had begun. And in the end, what they thought would end you only ensured that your rise was absolute, your power undeniable, and your enemies permanently humbled. You are not just surviving, you are triumphing, and every attempt to harm you only confirms the depth of your mastery. Family, if this message stirred something in your spirit, don't just keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss these revelations. Tap like to let the algorithm know this word was needed, and drop a comment below. Share your thoughts, your testimonies, or even the battles you've overcome. I want to hear from you. And don't stop there. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. Someone who needs to know they are not prey, they are chosen. The more you engage, the more this truth spreads, and together we're building a community of warriors who can't be silenced or broken. Your voice, your support, and your presence here are what keep this mission alive. So subscribe, like, comment, and share, and let's keep shaking the spiritual realm together. This is bigger than us. This is destiny. God bless you.